I really need to get one of those things which, if, when I'm starting, while it's still starting it up, that one of those videos that could play. Starting video thing. I wonder if I could get something of me basically wandering around like a Lego figurine, grabbing books from my bookshelf. That'd be quite cool. I'll have to think about it. I'll be when I get back. Oh, it started! Oh, it's actually working! Oh, goody! It's working. That's always wonderful. Make sure that's paused. Make sure that's at the right point before I start the PowerPoint. And then go. Hello, everyone! Hello, and welcome to Pearl Harbour. Battle Line sails out on December 6th. What happens? What happens indeed? That is a big question. Hello, everyone, and in a slight change from normal, I have really, I've got to apologise for two things. One, I'm going to be filming, instead of doing Discord, popping up in Discord after this, I'm going to be filming a backup video for Sunday in case I can't run a brew ships. I haven't currently scheduled a brew ships for Sunday because it's going to depend on the hotel Wi-Fi. I get to the hotel tomorrow evening, Friday evening. So I will be able to test the Wi-Fi then, and I'll work out whether or not the Wi-Fi is going to be suitable for it or not. And if it's not, I will schedule the backup video. But I'm going to record the backup video this evening. Hello everyone, how are we all doing? So, let's see. Pearl Harbour, Battle Line sails out on the December 6th. What happens? Well, this is the ideas from Leslie. This is a Patron video, and as always, with alternate histories, I will be doing a shameless book plug at some point in this video, and that is the point at which the history ends and we start going into the alternate history. Now, this is actually quite a fun one, because I didn't have to search that hard for reasons they would be leaving. I didn't have to search that hard for reasons they would be leaving. I really didn't. But still, it's a pretty interesting point to consider, because there's a very realistic possibility that the Japanese might not find the fleet in harbour. For example, they didn't know the carriers weren't there. The carriers left there days before the strike came in. And they didn't know not to expect the carriers to be in. The carriers were prime targets. But they weren't there. They were not there. With that being said, life happens on these occasions. Life really does happen on these occasions. And with the reality of with the carriers not being there, they go ahead with the strike. They're still carrying out the strike. They're still over there. So therefore, that does give an option of what happens if the entire US Naval Pacific Fleet is just not there. If the USN Pacific Fleet is just not there. That's an option. It's quite a scary option if you're the Japanese, but it's an option. In fact, honestly, if we consider it fully, it's not only an option, it's a actual possibility they should have probably planned for. But they didn't. They really didn't. So, yeah. Today's discussion. Pearl Harbour Battle Line sails out on December 6th. What happens? Today's discussion, and of course, not this Saturday, but next Saturday's videos. I don't know. I love the fact I do live and a long patrol for each of these topics, and I always mix them up and do them because it allows me to address pretty much everything I'd like to address without having to be repetitive. Now, I must admit, there is a part of me which is doubting the hotel will work on a Sunday, which is one of the reasons why I'm recording the backup video. But let's start off with some questions before we start, because I'm sure there's a few questions in the chat before we even get into this. Can the US fleet do gunnery practice against life-size targets? If they were given the opportunity. If they were given the opportunity. Ooh, very nice laptop, 96831. Yeah, I've got. I don't know if, because I was thinking about it before we started, but I've got to get one of those introduction videos. I've got to get an introduction video to start off these lives with. So when things are running a bit haywire, or as what happened, I had it starting, but it wasn't quite connecting. It wasn't sure when it was connecting, whether it's connecting, and I was just sort of fixing some things while it was mucking around. It actually, has something going for you guys. It'd be nice for you. Was recently reminded my laptop is now 11 years old. Don't remind me. It's when you realise you have computer components older than some of your friends' children. That's when it gets worrying. So let's consider what the fleet was in harbour, because that's an interesting point to start. The fleet in harbour is pretty darn strong. It is. It's pretty capable. But it's also not indefatigable in its strength. There is limits there. It's got 9 battleships, roughly, and I do mean as roughly, 18 destroyers in Destroyer Squadron 1 plus a light cruiser, and about 12 destroyers in Destroyer Flotilla 2 plus a light cruiser. Destroyer Flotilla 1, I mean, 18. And it's got 2 heavy cruisers and 4 light cruisers. You might notice there is a significant imbalance going on in the Pacific Fleet at this point. There's also the fact that the task forces out with the carriers that are out wandering also have more things with them, have some cruisers, etc. with them. But again, they don't have a lot of light cruisers going around. This is a big shortage of the U.S. Navy at the beginning of World War II. From at any point up until about 1943, the U.S. Navy always seems to be chronically short of light cruisers, and that's one of the reasons why you often find fewer light cruisers being deployed in operations than heavy cruisers, i.e., fewer 6-inch than 8-inch, because they are always short of them. They're coming, but they're just not there yet. Now, if we consider again this battle fleet, what are they truly in capability? Well, you have a couple of the Pennsylvania class, of course, with their 12 14-inch guns. You have the Nevada class with their 10 14-inch guns, and you have the Tennessee class with their 12 14-inch guns, and the Colorados with their 8 16-inch guns. Interestingly enough, Division 4 is hopefully labelled 4, and hopefully I haven't labelled it Battleship Division 3 by mistake. If I have, I'll be really annoyed with that, and I'll be correcting that at some point. Oh yes, I have. I've made a mistake. I've called it Battleship Division 3. But it is the 3rd Battleship Division, so, But I'm going to make sure it's updated, it's corrected. Now, the Battleship Divisions are under Isaac Kidd, Admiral Pye. Pye, of course, has other roles, and he's doing all sorts of interesting things. And you have Anderson is in charge of Battleship Division 4. Now, Pye is not only Rear Admiral Pye in charge of Battleship Division 2, he's Vice Admiral William Statterley Pye in charge of the Battle Force, Task Force 1. And you always have to remember that the US Navy at this point, they're all Rear Admirals. Any rank above Rear Admiral is an acting rank. It's given to you for the role. It's a brevet rank. It's not a real rank. And realistically, at sea, if Admiral Kimmel is with the fleet, Admiral Kimmel is in charge. So that is one of the options. Does Kimmel deploy the battle fleet with Pi leading it and Pi in charge as a task force, or does he deploy it as a fleet with himself in charge? There is a goodly argument for both. And there is a discussion worthwhile having there. And these are some of the extra things I'm going to discuss in the live tonight rather than in the Long Patrol. Long Patrol discussed some things, live will discuss others. One of the things about the live is it's quite useful for me to discuss the random extra bits. That's why I like them. So, in the case of this force, they're fairly flexible, they're fairly capable, but cruisers are definitely a shortage. They have 2 heavy cruisers, both New Orleans class, New Orleans and San Francisco. And they have 2 Brooklyns and 2 St. Louis class. Just think about that. No. They're all 4 Brooklyns, I think, actually. Why is my note saying St. Louis class? Oh, yes! Oh, okay. So, the Americans did have a St. Louis class cruiser. And those had been in commission until 1923. And if you want to have some fun, because I went to check, because I knew if I said anything wrong on this list, I had to go and check Wiki, because I knew someone would quote Wiki to me. If you go to Wikipedia, they've got the 2 cruisers, 2 of the light cruisers are St. Louis class. And that's my notes saying that. My notes have St. Louis class, ha ha ha. Well, it actually goes, oops, ha ha ha, next to it. I've got to stop putting jokes in my notes to myself, because I forget the jokes. It's terrible. Now, I've also got, no, let's be honest, they have got some interesting cruisers. They have got some very interesting cruisers, in that the cruisers leading the destroyer flotillas are both Omaha class. Raleigh, which I have to say I quite like the name of, but you know, it is interesting, and Detroit. They have 8 Bagley class destroyers are technically part of Destroyer Flotilla 2, and they technically have 4 other World War I design destroyers. You know, 4 stackers. I think they're all, if I'm not sure, Sampson and Wicks classes, aren't they? From memory. Looking at those names, yeah, they're Sampson and Wicks classes. Pardon me. But they're the last 4 on Destroyer Flotilla 2, and my theory was that if you're sending the full fleet to sea, Destroyer Flotilla going out to sea with only 8 destroyers doesn't sound good. That means Destroyer Flotilla 2 is basically Destroyer Squadron 2, not Destroyer Flotilla 2. So adding in the 4 older destroyers, they might not be great, but they're better than nothing. It's not too many battleships. It's not too many battleships. It's, if you're sending a major fleet, it's the battle fleet you want at this point. If you're thinking about sending a message around the world this time, this is the battle fleet you want. It's the capability you want. It would have been cute if they had been St. Louis class light cruisers. But no, they're all of them are Brooklyns. And that's also a problem, because think about it, there are no Atlantas here. There are no Atlanta class light cruisers here. That's a problem. For you asking the question of, are they in service yet? Well, Atlanta itself doesn't commission until the 24th of December 1941. So, yeah, there's your problem. As I've tried to make this point, so this is very much what the US Navy have been dealing with as a legacy since World War I. And since the build-up before World War I. I've talked about this before in other videos. US Congress are their own worst enemy when it comes to strategic power and presence. When they are paying to build up as part of the dreadnought race, the qualitative race, they're quite happy to pay for battleships, they won't pay for cruisers. At the end of World War I, they are buying huge numbers of destroyers. They're not buying barely any cruisers. They've been buying barely any cruisers the entire way through the interwar years. Barely any cruisers. Always the minimal numbers. Yes, they are surging at this point. Yes, you can say there's but those ships aren't going to start entering service until 1942 onwards. So this is a force which is very light cruiser-wise. Which means it's a good fighting force, but it's not a good reconnaissance force. The only force which you might be able to use for reconnaissance, because it's at full strength, so it can do a reconnaissance operation, would be Destroyer Flotilla 1. And you don't want to use Destroyer Flotilla 1 as your reconnaissance force, because they're your main escort force. They're what's going to keep you alive in a fight, and in the fight. Destroyer Flotilla 2, not at strength. I can only make it up to 12 vessels if I add in those 4 World War I ships. That's not enough for a reconnaissance force. And are you going to send Cruiser Division 6 out? Cruiser Division 9 out? That's all your cruisers gone. All your firm backing that can provide you some heavy AA and support your destroyers. And again, I just brought this up, but it's worthwhile noting. In terms of AA, this is the fruit of US Navy December 1941 AA. Not January 1942 AA, not January 1943 AA, not January 1944 AA, or January 1945 AA. This is December 1941. They ain't got the 20mm swarm. They ain't packing more metal and shrapnel on their decks than a Texas cowboy in the age of the Great West. They're nothing at the moment on that level. So, yeah. At this point, the US fleet in harbour is a very strong sledgehammer, but it's a sledgehammer with no focus of where to go. Now, Gooch, thanks to 10-year-old, the Royal Navy was building up based on War Starts 1942. What date, if any, was the USN build up aimed at? Well, think about when the Essex swarm are just supposed to come into service. That will give you a clue. Because if we consider the Essex swarm, they were mostly, and I will say this, mostly ordered in 1940. They were supposed to be, when we're talking, especially sort of the other ones, they're ordered 1940, and they're supposed to be being launched 1942, commissioned 1943. So probably the US Navy's thinking about war 1944. That would also explain why the vast majority of Essexes, i.e. the first Well, if you start looking at them, a goodly number of them are commissioning in 1944. A goodly number of them commission in 1944. Some commission in 1943. You pretty much have 6 commissioned in 1943, 1 commissions in 1942, and a large number of the rest commissioned in 1944. And so that's basically the scenario of what you'd be thinking at for maybe a war. So, that's usually how you can tell when a fleet's looking for or thinking about war. It's when they've what timeline is are they building? They're building projects, and what they're building their fleet around. It's also that scenario if you start looking at their cruiser builds, if you start looking at a lot of their battleship construction, a lot of their the ships, the things that are going to be coming online. Yes, they're going to be coming online before that, but when's the big bump up in number? It's roughly 43, 44. So that's usually when they're looking at about war they're expecting is about 1944. So for them, war hits about 3 years early. For the Royal Navy, it hits about 3 years early. You notice there's a sort of theme going on here. But the USN started preparing for war about 1937, the same point as the Royal Navy. So the USN was planning on. Well, the Royal Navy gets told 1932 the 10-year rules off, so they're planning for war in 1942, but they actually get the financial breaks off in 1937. It's the same for the USN. They start to get more funding in about 1937 onwards. And so the USN sort of planning on having 7 years to run up to war, and if you look at the way their fleet's expanding, that makes sense. And you can even tell they're probably expecting Nimitz to be chief of naval operations by that time. That would probably be, if war had held off for that long, you're probably looking at Nimitz as chief naval operations instead of commander-in-chief Pacific Fleet. Did they take Utah along? Doubt it. Yeah. Now, there are other arguments people use, they were planning on war earlier than that, etc. And you sort of go, well, they're not really. Because the really interesting thing for you to do, if they're the other trick to look at when nations are planning on war starting is look at when they're crash building their smaller assets. What they can build most quickly. So when does the crash build of destroyers come in? And that's always the question. When does the crash build of destroyers come in? The USN, of course, we'll be talking about the Gearing class. Well, they're only authorized in 1942. They're preceded by the Sumners, which there's 58 of them. They're lovely. But again, look at when they're laid down, look at when they're ordered. Look at the Fletchers. Again, lovely vessels. They are excellent vessels. They complete 175 of them. They are an absolute massive storm of them. A massive capability. But, I will say this, once you start looking down lists of Fletcher-class destroyers and you look at when they're laid down, when they're ordered, they all start to come in service 1942 onwards. And once you get into the real numbers, well, yeah, they're building them as quickly as they can, but these things were not ordered. The ones ordered before December 1941, or even laid down before December 1941, let alone ordered before December 1941, There aren't so many of them. There aren't so many of those. Versus the number ordered afterwards. They're about preparations for war. The Fletchers were supposed to be sort of the expansion for it. So yeah. Well, 1943-44 time. Okay. Has there ever been a build up for war and then no war? Yeah, sometimes. If you manage to correct a procurement strategy correctly, you can use it as a deterrent and you can prevent war. And let's be honest, which is cheaper, to buy a load of weapons and not use them, or not buy weapons and end up having to crash buy a load and use them? But again, imagine this and compare this to what a Royal Navy force at this time would look like. You would see more cruisers, wouldn't you? The Royal Navy force would have had more cruisers in it. And this is not me singing the Royal Navy's praises. It's not the Royal Navy which gets that, or the US Navy which doesn't. It's not Navy. It's the governments and what they're prepared to fund. The Royal Navy would have more cruisers available at this point. They would have more cruisers, even in 1939, with their battleships at this point. There would not be a scenario where you have the battle fleet sitting there and there's not cruisers around. Luke Donovan, would it be correct to say they could hit but not see what they're hitting? They couldn't find what to hit. That's the thing. They could hit anything, they could see it. But they couldn't find it, so they couldn't find it to see it. So then let's ask the question, which I normally get asked at this point, is why were they not at sea? Why were they not at sea? Well, Kimmel has 3 big problems. 4 if you count his own government. I'll get on to the government one. First problem. He only has so much fuel. And he has only so many tankers. And if he tries to keep all his fleet at sea, instead of rotating task forces in and out, carriers out, battleships out, etc., he's going to run out of fuel quickly. Because Pearl Harbour hasn't been properly infrastructured up, hasn't been properly set up, and isn't being properly sustained and supplied. So there's only so much he can do. Number 2. If you get the ships at sea at all time, A, that means salt water, and B, that means machinery wear. All the time. Hello, Sal. And if you've got machinery wear, and if you've got salt water all the time, those ships' maintenance bills are going to go through the roof. Absolutely through the roof. It's going to be a nightmare. It's going to be a fundamental nightmare for everyone involved. And finally, the third reason not to be at sea all the time is he wants to be probably as much as he can be as close to his base as possible, his headquarters, so he can actually try and get information from Washington about what's going on. So he can actually find out what's going on. Now, the fourth problem, and the fourth reason he's not at sea, is because, you see, the government had a bright idea. I've covered this before, but I think it's worthwhile mentioning, because Kimmel gets a lot of blame for not being able to read the tea leaves. Well, the trouble is with Kimmel is he's been asked to read the tea leaves when the government are obscuring half the cup. You see, they'd had some problem with his predecessor, Richardson. Richardson, it turns out, was a specialist when it came to Japan. And when they gave him all the information they were getting, all the intelligence, he was arguing with them about basing the fleet in Hawaii, about their policy in terms of deterrence, about how they were managing and sustaining the fleet in Hawaii, about how he wasn't getting enough supplies for the fleet in Hawaii, about how if you want him to be based in Hawaii, you need to frigating support him in Hawaii. The whole time. And that was annoying to the government. That caused Roosevelt and a few others to feel embarrassed. They were being attacked by an admiral. And he was landing critical hits. It's like a person's been playing for 6 years and you've just joined the game and you're up against them. There is no chance of you landing a hit or anything. They are just overwhelming you. They are a multi-level wizard with every single fireball they can possibly imagine. It's just a nightmare. So, when they get rid of Richardson, because he's annoying them, and they replace him with Kimmel, to stop Kimmel, who is another quite bright admiral, from becoming like Richardson, they forget to give him the intelligence. They don't add his name to the list of people who can get the up-to-date, full details about what Japan is doing. He's on the lower list. That was a big brain move, wasn't it? That was a really big brain move. And by the way, they used therefore his not being ready for the attack because as the reason to can him later. It's just so annoying. It's so annoying. So, there's a good reason they're not at sea. But guess what? There are 3 scenarios where they probably are at sea. One of those is, if he gets told that they've lost track of the Kido Butai and have no idea where they are, he would probably had them at sea. Unfortunately, he'd also been stripped of getting the information like the things about the Taranto raid and the reports done on that, but he still probably would have them gone to sea because he'd taken part in enough exercise which had involved enough aerial attacks on Pearl Harbour, which had sunk ships, that frankly he had it in his mind. No, Richardson? Oh, you can look up Richardson on Wikipedia. Basically, the US government spends the rest of the war trying to keep him quiet. And trying to put all the blame for Pearl Harbour on him. On Kimmel. It's just... Yeah, there are things I will respect Roosevelt on, but on his treatment of Richardson and his treatment of Kimmel, the man gets no respect from me. At all. In that scenario, frankly, if I'm just thinking about those, whatever respect I have for Roosevelt disappears. Whatever appreciation I have for his abilities as a leader to get America what it needs at the time and do decisions that needs to be done, disappear because of the way he acted over them. If you have your expert admiral, the acknowledged expert on Japan, telling you something based on the intelligence you're getting, and your response is not to listen to it, but to decide it's politically difficult and get rid of him, that's stupid. But to then go, I'll prevent this scenario happening again by preventing the new admiral getting the intelligence they need to do their job, there is an argument that is treasonous, in my book. There is an argument that is treasonous. And I don't think that's wrong to say. I can understand their decision-making. It's very politician decision-making. It's very much, this is about political, this is about the image of it. This is about us dealing with a problem. A political problem. But when Nimitz became took over after him, one of the things he did was he specifically, didn't fire Kimmel's team, because he knew they weren't at fault for Pearl Harbour. But also, he basically instructs his intelligence section to make sure he is never not informed ever again. Nimitz pretty much spends most of World War II having to run not only an intelligence option section evaluating the Japanese, but his intelligence people also have to be watching their own government and MacArthur. Way to overload your own people. Because you have to. Because if you don't, who knows what the government are going to get up to? They're morons. With that being said, let's consider the target selection the Japanese have. Because I thought, well, hang on, we have to consider before we get there, what happens if they do strike Pearl Harbour and the fleet's not there? What are they going to hit? Well, the fact is, even in the original strikes, because they cut off their next strikes, their third and fourth strikes, they didn't hit the oil storage tanks. Big failing. I'd have hit those. Not because destroying the oil is going to fundamentally cause the Americans too much trouble. They can replace the oil. But the storage tanks, that's more difficult. The pumping gear, the stuff which allows you to supply the ships, oh, that's going to be a nightmare to replace. I mean, most of that stuff is special order, and the US Navy didn't get the budget to have any spares stored in warehouses. So you destroy those pumps, they're going to be knocked out for a year, perhaps. It's gonna be fun. There is Simpac headquarters building, which is very, very blow-upable. Very, very much able to be blown up. There is the submarine base. Always useful to hit that. Let's be honest. Taking out the submarines, useful. Always good, advantageous. We know how useful they are. And then there's the Navy Yard, which barely gets hit as well. I mean, they go after USS Pennsylvania, but you know, who wouldn't go after Pennsylvania? It's just, when you start looking at what they're missing, attacking the airfields, they're easy to repair. They are good initial attacks because they stop your subsequent attacks having to deal with so many enemy aircraft in the air and air defenses. Great, take them out. But not following up with strikes 3 and 4 is frankly so silly. Because, yes, sinking the ships causes trouble. But if you damage the Navy Yard, if you damage the oil storage tanks, if you damage the submarine base and taken out the headquarters, you could have done so much more. You could have done damage which would have set the US systems back months alone based on that. Let's think about it. Those very same positions are what are critical to recovering from the attack on the ships. They are critical to coordinating the response that allows you to get the ships back working, get the ships up from the sea. They are critical to organising the responses which come afterwards. So if you destroy them, they're gone. They have to be rebuilt. Think of all the sensitive machinery in that headquarters building. All the comms equipment, all the ciphers, all the communication systems. Gone. Think of the cranes. Think of the stores, the oxy-settling tanks, all the other systems in the Navy Yard. If they're gone. Submarine base. You hit that hard. Well, you never know. You might make some submarine commander's day by blowing up their stockpile of Mark 14s, but I doubt they'd be that lucky. And I know there are people who don't like my digs at Mark 14s, but please note the digs at Mark 14s are not digs at the US Submarine Service, or they are digs at the Bureau of Ordnance, who were that cruel to them and sent them. Everyone has their own issues. As I've said before, the British issues with torpedoes are interesting, but mostly some of them are slightly overblown for reasons that I've explained when I've talked about it before. But even the British have issues, and they do the most testing of anyone prior to World War II. Magooch, he could have delivered a third strike. Maybe not the fourth, but he could have delivered the third. And whilst, yes, the air group is decreasing, it's not decreasing by that much. And the ability to resist is decreasing faster. the ships are in trouble, the airfield's attacked, and these things, you know, you are limiting other things in different ways. So, yeah. I think he could have justified the third strike. But ultimately, as we've been over before, he could launch all 4 strikes. It's not going to change the outcome of the war. Loki's children. Plus, remember, the aircraft carriers at sea would not have any refueling facilities and more likely go back to USA to refuel and repair. Well, that's if they could get back to the USA to refuel and repair. Just think about it. If you take out the fueling facilities, then until they can get tankers there to refuel the ships, they can't go anywhere. Because they don't have the fuel to. And remember, the fleet oilers, the fast fleet tankers, they also need fuel to run, and they need to have a load of fuel aboard. So, yeah, Mark 14 torpedo did have a 50% failure rate in pre-war live testing. Yeah, that just the Bureau of Ordnance is just. Between them and Roosevelt and the political decisions he makes about admirals, there is honestly a hard question to work out who is doing more to try and undermine the US Navy at this point. Congress with their funding, Roosevelt with his politics over Roosevelt's team and their views over the politics of the admirals, and Bureau of Ordnance with their treatment of ammunition. They all have problems. They are all fairly sure anti-navy organizations at certain points. It's just, yeah, we'll leave it to one side. Anyway, with this being the case, this is an option. That's what they could be hitting. That's what they could be hitting if they decided to attack. 4.5 million barrels of fuel in the Pearl Harbour tanks. Yeah, you take that out. That's not going to be a fun day for the US Navy. But as said, the fuel's more easily to restock than the infrastructure that supports the fuel. That is the problem. So, we are 100% sure the UIGN hadn't infiltrated the Bureau of Ordnance during World War II. No, but I was reading somewhere in the comments the other someday. Oh, was it on Twitter? Someone was saying it was Nazi spies, and I was sitting there going, but the Mark 14 torpedo was actually conceived before the Nazi Party came to power. Actually, I think the Mark 14 torpedo might have been conceived before the Nazis even existed. The 11th Fleet Oilers. Ouch. This is the good thing about having Sal in the chat. That's what's going on with shipping. And if you aren't seeing his channel, then I'm honestly surprised because more people watch his channel than mine. But the 11th Fleet Oilers could carry 750,000 barrels of fuel. The pre-war monthly consumption was 400,000. In the first 9 days of wartime steaming, they used 750,000 barrels of fuel. Damaging the tanks, even 25 or 50% causes a major oil headache for the US fleet, especially until the US can shift commercial tankers to the Pacific. Yeah, if you want to make this problematic for the US Navy, you damage these oil facilities. You damage them hard. Oh. Melissa Gordy, the pistol used in the Mark 14 100% came from before the Nazi Party existed. Take care, Sal. Good luck in your meeting. So let's consider the route of the attack, okay? The route of the attack. Can you avoid them? What are the options here? Well, actually, if we consider it, as long as you don't go north, you won't run directly into the Japanese fleet, the Kita Butai. You won't. As long as you don't go north. And if we consider both Enterprise and Lexington go west quite happily and don't run into the Japanese, they seem to do okay going that distance. So basically, if you go west, east, or south, you're probably okay. You're probably going further away from where the Japanese will be. So there are options here. There are options. Good options? No. But there are options. Now, the other thing to remember is these ships had left harbour on the 26th of November. The Kido Butai left Japan on the 26th of November. So they leave 11 days before they hit. 11 days. There's an important thing here going on, and we're talking about this as we go on. But they leave 11 days before they're hit. So, the thing is also, is that during those 11 days, I've talked about this in the past, it's quite difficult to reach them, to communicate with them. There are opportunities, but the further away from Japan they are, the more difficult it is to try and recall them. The more it's going to be a very loud radio message or something which everyone's going to hear. But also means it's very difficult for you to get them the updates of intelligence. So the only scenario where you break your intelligence, your radio blackout, or trying to radio to them, is probably if you get word the US Navy has left harbour. Is if you get word that the US Navy has left harbour. If you don't get that word, then you don't do it. You don't do it. It's just, it's the fun it's the fun point of this operation is that, there are spaces for them to go. There are certainly spaces for them to go. But it doesn't happen. It does not happen. It should do, but it doesn't happen. So, there are options there are to go out to sea. And when we go further, we have to start asking what's the scenario. Now, normally this would come after the Seamus book plug, because this is starting to get to alternate history. But there's a reason I've got this scheduled this, and there's a reason I've just been pointing about the 26th of November. It's worthwhile having that as an understandable point, having that as something we, to think about. The first question we have to ask before we set up a scenario is not where they would go, but why they would go. As it's that which to define where they went. If they're heading south or east, when they would be putting distance between themselves and the Kido Butai. Now, why am I saying this? Why am I emphasizing this? Because let's think about it. What are the options for them? Where are they going to go? Well, if they hear about the Kido Butai, they're going to go north, aren't they? But do they really want to go north? Do they really want to go north? Going north could cause all sorts of troubles, and they haven't got their carriers with them. So they probably, if they hear about the Kido Butai, they're going west. Because then they can meet up their carriers, right? That's the sensible thing. Meet up with your carriers. You've got a carrier force coming to attack you, meet up with your carriers. Maybe go south. Admittedly, that's abandoning Pearl Harbour, but staying as a fleet in harbour to be attacked is not a good idea. Mers el Kabir, Taranto, and countless other scenarios have told you staying as a fleet in harbour where you cannot manoeuvre your ships is not a good idea when the enemy are coming to hit you. It could look like cowardice, but it's also sensible. But if you go west, you can maybe meet up the carriers, and you can maybe turn into an ambush chance. Okay, that's if you hear they're coming. But for that, you'd have to hear they're coming. And considering the amount of efforts the Japanese put into this, changing it so you hear they're coming is difficult. I know I've done it before. I was asked it specifically as an alternate history, so I've looked into it. And pretty much the only chance I could do to move it was to move an anti-submarine warfare group, which were doing ASW training and drills, from where they were training to somewhere else. That was my only option. It wasn't a particularly great one, but it's what I had to do. What are the other options? The other option is that they are being sent to do a demonstration somewhere. They're being sent to do a demonstration somewhere. Well, that's an option. But you won't be sending them to do a demonstration at Midway. You won't be sending them to do a demonstration at Wake. That's not going to demonstrate anything or help anything. So they've got to be doing something else. Well, the option comes when we start considering a very interesting piece of history. And this piece of history is the Hull Note. Now, this is the letter from Cordell Hull sent on, and I give you a drum roll, the 26th of November, 1941. The 26th of November, 1941. Bijon, even if the B-17s arrive a week earlier, or even a week or two earlier, their number of B-17s being sent versus the number of their likely patrol patterns, considering the number of aircraft they'd had available, would probably not find the Japanese. One of the things you have to remember is the Japanese specifically went for the northern route because most of the American searching was done west. So the Americans didn't think the Japanese would come in from above, and they weren't really watching that route as well. This is the scenario we had, and remember, we did a whole video about that, so I will return to go to that video where I get into all that. But yeah, this is the Hull Note. And the Hull Note is a great piece of diplomacy if you want to cause trouble. It really is a great piece of diplomacy if you want to cause trouble. Why? Because on the face of it, it can sound so wonderful, but the moment you get into it, the moment you start looking at its details, you start realizing that it's really not that good. It's really not that good. It's a draft mutual declaration of policy. Yes, but it's the government of the United States and the government of Japan both being solicitous for peace of the Pacific affirm that their national policies are directed towards lasting a sense of peace throughout the Pacific area, that they have no territorial designs in that area, that they have no intention of threatening other countries or using military force aggressively against any neighboring nation, and that accordingly in their national policies they will actively support and give practical application to the following fundamental principles upon which their relations with each other and with all other governments are based. The principle of inviolability of territorial integrity and sovereignty of each and all nations. Now, that's fine on paper. That's a worthy goal. That really is. But as a diplomatic outgoing to Japan at this point, who you are trying to force out of China and have been very critical, and who, as their first, most recent memory of the international world stage, is your fleet, under Commodore Perry, forcing its way into Japan, that might not go down well. Now, as we've said before, there were odds on the British would have done it if the Americans hadn't. But the Americans did it. And that meant that they had the original sin, according to Japan. The principle of non-interference in the internal affairs of other countries. Again, a worthy thing. But Japan finds it strange that you were happy to do it to them, but now they're doing it to others, you don't want them to do it. See the problem with this? This is the scenario for America at this point. They are saying these things, and they are worthy things to say. But you have to follow them through. The principle of equality, including equality of commercial opportunity and treatment. Okay, fine. But you're a colossal economy. The Japanese economy is still building and trying to develop. And they don't see it as equality. They see it as you trying to open up their market for your goods, which will be produced cheaper in a greater volume than they can manage. That's what they see as the problem. That gets in the way of their industrial development, their creation. The principle of reliance upon international cooperation and conciliation for the prevention and pacific settlement of controversies and for improvement of international conditions by peaceful methods and processes. Ooh. That again sounds lovely. It again sounds lovely. It isn't though, is it? It's not. And on top of that, the government of Japan and the government of the United States have agreed that toward eliminating chronic political instability, preventing recurrent economic collapse, and providing a basis of peace, they will actively support and practically apply the following principles in their economic relations with each other and with other nations and peoples. Okay. And it goes on. But we realise that Section 2 is the big part of it, and this is what might give us a deployment of the fleet. The government of the United States and the government of Japan will endeavour to conclude a multilateral non-aggression pact among the British Empire, China, Japan, the Netherlands, the Soviet Union, Thailand, and the United States. Both governments will endeavour to conclude among the American, British, Chinese, Japanese, the Netherlands, and Thai governments an agreement whereunder each of the governments would pledge itself to respect the territorial integrity of French Indochina, and in the event that there should develop a threat to the territorial integrity of Indochina, to enter into immediate consultation with view to taking such measures as may be deemed necessary and advisable to meet the threat in question. Such agreement would provide also that each of the governments party to the agreement would not seek or accept preferential treatment in its trade or economic relations with Indochina, and would use its influence to obtain for each of the signatories equality of treatment in trade and commerce with French Indochina. The government of Japan will withdraw all military, naval, air, and police forces from China and from Indochina. The government of the United States and the government of Japan will not support militarily, politically, economically any government or regime in China other than the national government of the Republic of China, with capital temporarily at Chongqing. And it carries on. It carries on. Well, can you see the problem here? Now, how would I have phrased it? Well, if you want to phrase this as something other than an ultimatum where you're building a lot more ships than they can ever build, already at this point, you've ordered them, and they know that it's just a ticking clock until so you can stomp them with your eyes closed. Possibly. The Americans could have phrased it, they will withdraw from, if Japan withdraws from China and Indochina, they will withdraw from the Philippines. The Americans wanted out of the Philippines anyway at this point. They could have offered it. But they weren't going to. If you go through this note, it is, on the face of it, lovely and fair. But once you start looking into its meat, it's very much, Japan will do this. Japan must do this. Japan must do this. And Japan doesn't like that. Now the thing is, if you're going to send a note like this, as William Pitt would have told Roosevelt, and Hull, should Cordell Hull have asked William Pitt for his advice, you'd better mobilize sufficient force to be able to make sure they understand that that note is backed up by steel and fire. And Mark Harkness, yes, I know. After the US already shot down a declaration of equality of nations opposed by Japan at Versailles. Yeah. This is the trouble for America. In this scenario, they might be the goodish guys, but they're not good guys. There's nothing wrong with that. Very few nations are. In fact, no nations really are. There's nations throughout their history are one rule for us, another for everyone else. Because we understand the full context of why we're doing it. There's no context which can justify what you're doing. That's it. And I understand why the Americans are doing this and why they're saying this. They don't want the Japanese getting control of French Indochina, because if the Japanese start doing that, then they're pushing round their defensive positions, and they can maybe get to the Dutch East Indies, and that stops the Americans having any coercion over Japan is their view. Now, here is the policy then, and we're going to get to that policy after we've done a shameless book plug! Yes! This is the chance where I get to say thank you to you all for your support in this channel and for all the help you do. Now, I've got some things to say to you, and I'm going to say them very clearly. If you want to follow me on Twitch, it's quite easy. You can subscribe, which is always fun. And you can pick what level of subscription you have. You can make sure it's a full star of these things, so you're told when I have the events. Now that's down, I think if I put it, look down there, please go there. If you're on YouTube, and that's always an option, if you're on YouTube, and I pick around which way I do this first, you have to be even more careful. Oh yes, you do. Because you see, if you're on YouTube, you will notice down about here, there's a subscribe button. Now, here's the thing. If you just press subscribe, you'll be subscribed. But you'll notice the bell that you get is just an outline of a bell. That's because YouTube automatically puts you on personalized subscription is what they call it. And that's when their algorithm tells you what they think you would like of a broadcaster's content. They pick it for you. So you might go, well, hang on, I'm subscribed. Why am I not getting told something's happening? That's because YouTube has decided they don't think you'd like it. Before they've even seen it, they decided you won't like it. They don't even give you the opportunity. So if you want to take the power back from YouTube for seeing what you've subscribed to, then you make sure you click on that subscription button and you click on that bell and it's filled in. Because if it's filled in, then you get the power to decide what you watch, not YouTube. And that's good, isn't it? That's what we want. We want to decide what we watch. It's the way to be. James book plug. And, you know, these things help. Now, Lyons had just said, would deploying a fleet to Midway or something be something similar? No. But if you're heading a fleet in the direction of Thailand, the Philippines, to South China Sea, to go through the Sallied Sea. So, you know, the Philippine Sea is this side. If you pop into the Sallied Sea, which is underneath the Philippines, you can go into the South China Sea slightly from the south. It works. You can get in there. And you can go up at night and you can trail your fleet through the South China Sea. Now, why would you do that? Why would you send your fleet to the South China Sea? Because that makes a big statement. That's a big statement. And again, that's straight out the thing of Pitt. There are some problems with this. For it to be viable, those tankers, which Sal very kindly mentioned earlier, would need to be pretty much with the fleet in Hawaii ready to go. They'd pretty much need to be ready to go. If you want to get across the Pacific and you want to get to the Philippines with that full fleet, you'd better have those tankers with you. You're also probably going to have to slightly call on the British at Singapore to get some fuel. But you can do that by combining with Force Z. Force Z could come out and play, exercise with you. That could be the idea. Oh, we'll send our whole fleet to the Philippines, and then your battleships can join up, and then we have now a very good force. Bringing our carriers along as well. That's quite a scary capability if you think about it. And if the US Pacific Fleet turned up in the South China Sea, that's a big statement to the Japanese. We are not only watching, we're prepared to do something about it. And you're showing you how well we can do something about it. So listen to us. Now the timeline would go as follows. The hull note gets sent in on 26th of November. They wait roughly 7 to 8 days. So that's pretty much the 4th of December. For a response. They don't get any response. They haven't done any aggressive movements. That's what they've had. Well, they give orders to the fleet to prepare for the 5th. Prepare for the 5th. Prepare to go to sea. And they go to sea on the 6th. That works. That works. It's a long way for them to go. It is a long way for them to go. But it's not impossible. In fact, their fleet's entirely designed around it. Try. In fact, you can say if you go and do this demonstration, if you go and demonstrate at this scenario that you can reach it, that could be the ultimate threat to Japan. Look how quickly we can get our fleet to the South China Sea. If it was going a little bit north, think about it, how it could get close to Japan. It's conventional deterrence at the really sharp end. It's conflict management at the really sharp end when you're deploying a whole major force. Think of it today, it would be the equivalent of you sailing three American carrier battle groups with full war level escort through the Taiwanese Straits. That's pretty much what you're doing. We're going, yeah, we're here. What do you want to do about it? Getting the RN and the Dutch and Aussies involved is a good way to solve the US cruiser shortage. It's a good way to hold things out, yes. And, at this point, if you remember, this is thinking about it from November 1941. Not December 1941 thinking, this is November 1941 thinking. It's a perfectly safe option to do. It's a perfectly viable option to do at this point. That's what they'd be thinking. That's what their intelligence and everything would probably indicate. From all I've read. And so, yeah. Now, probably at this point, someone is going to say, but Alex, what about getting out of port? What about the Japanese submarines? What about the Japanese submarines? Well, yeah. Peter Dawson, the navies don't tend to go by the Great Circle routes. So you're not going to go north and west for that route, because you're going to want to, if you especially, if a fleet is, the point is it's supposed to appear in the South China Sea without people seeing it coming. Okay? If you go by the Great Circle route, there's going to be a lot of merchant ships on there. It's the same reason why the Japanese route is not the Great Circle route, to avoid the merchant traders and the merchant unions. So you will not go anywhere near the Great Circle route. You will not do that. You'll go in as how to put it, navally sensible route as possible. Darren, a little trivia. The US destroyer Allen was the last survivor of the pre-Wicks Clemson classes. That would be scraping the bottom of the barrel. But it would still be an extra destroyer. It is scraping the bottom barrel, but it's still an extra destroyer. So Colorado and Saratoga are both ordered to button up and join the fleet from San Diego while waiting for any response. Potentially, but probably it's going to take a while for them to be organized into it. It'll take a while. Now, the Japanese submarines, whilst there are a few on their way, there are 5, I-16, 18, 20, 22 and 24. They're all loaded with Type A midget submarines. They're all loaded with Type A midget submarines, so they all have parasites. And they're all moving into position on the 6th with the aim of launching their parasite craft by 0100s on the 7th. So if you're leaving in the morning the 6th, there is a goodly chance none of them will see you. There's an even greater chance, even if they do see you, they will be concentrating on hiding from you so they won't realize what you're doing. And they all have parasite craft on, so getting in a position to attack is going to be a nightmare. And on top of this, you always have to remember that Japanese submarine captains tend to be very highly mission orientated. And they're probably going to consider their mission is their priority. And their mission is not to attack enemy forces at sea, it's to get those midget submarines in position to attack the harbour. So that's what they're going to do. That is what they're going to do. Now, when we consider that as an option, and the submarines are out the way, we can talk about the aircraft carriers. Now, it's not just aircraft carriers we're meeting up. There's 6 8-inch gun cruisers and 13 destroyers with them. 6 8-inch gun cruisers and 13 of the destroyers. See what I mean about making second flotilla up to a different force? And possibly then making those World War I survivor vessels, destroyers, into plane guards. In the nicest way, with 13 destroyers, you could add 12 of those into, well, 10 of those into Flotilla 2. Take out the 4 old ones, the 4 World War I vessels. You add them onto the 3 destroyers which are remaining, and could substitute the plane guards in. Or you could leave them as they are. Leave them as they are. That's an option. But I honestly believe you would go meet up with Lexington next Enterprise. There is actually a question as to whether Lexington has actually left, because you have to remember she only leaves port, and you can see this if you go back and look at the data. And this example is a really good one. She only leaves on the 5th. She's the blue. She leaves on the 5th. Pretty much. And yeah. If she leaves on the 5th, why would you let her go if you're planning on her fleet going out on the 6th with notice? You won't. So she'll be with the fleet anyway. So you have a carrier, and you have her lesser number of destroyers, because she only has 5 destroyers with her, and 3 cruisers. So you have them added onto your force already. And you probably plan on meeting up with Enterprise. And your plan is to sail to the South China Sea and demonstrate your fleet. Thank you, Nightwolf and Jonathan Moon, for the stretches. And if you do that, well, you have a force. Now, the Kido Batai is a lot stronger than these 2 carriers on that, just with these 2 carriers. It is. But on the balance of things, the US Pacific Fleet also has a lot of battleships with it, which are going to be far more attractive to a certain type of Japanese carrier pilot. So I don't see that as necessarily as big a problem for the carrier operations as some might think. I see it as a bit of a problem for certain scenarios, but it's not going to be a massive one. It's not going to be a major steaming problem. It's going to be an issue, but life is always an issue. Life is always an issue. It's never going to be straightforward. It's never going to be simple. So, they have now their fleets. They are going to have their carriers with them. Again, if we go back to this lovely point here, and we look at where Enterprise is, on the 5th of December, she is pretty darn good, and on the 6th of December, she's actually in the same space as Lexington was historically. She gets back home on the 7th of December. So she is not a long way away for them to pick up. Not a long way away for them to come pick up. So they have their carriers. They're not without air defense. So the question then becomes, well, there are 3 questions which come from this, and I will attempt to answer each of them in turn. But first of all, I'll go through the comments quickly before I get into this. Answered that one from Danny Wright. Thank you. Talked about that one. There are issues with us all. There are some issues. But it's all solvable, realistically. Now, so do the Japanese attack Pearl Harbour or try to find a fleet? I seem to have to be up to date with the comments. Just saying that, just checking that our comments are still working, so... just checking the comments are still working. Yeah, USS Ward sunk one of those midget submarines, yeah. We got some good things here. You are, of course, leaving Pearl Harbour without any viable warships in it, and that's one of the things. If you take those World War I ships with you, you are leaving Pearl Harbour without those vessels which are part of its defence force. Admittedly, you need them. You need them if you're taking that fleet to sea. You do not have enough destroyers to leave them behind. You do not have enough cruisers to leave them behind. You do not have enough in general to leave anything behind. If your option is nothing, or something, you take something. That's the reality of what we're talking about. Now, do the Japanese attack Pearl Harbour or try to find a fleet? Well, I'm going to actually... answer both these questions long term, but I wanted to take you through your thinking. How will the Japanese find out about the fleet's movements? Well, we know historically they're not getting much information from that. There is always accusations of fifth columnists. There's always accusations or accusations of all sorts of things, but realistically, they're not getting a lot of information. And one of the interesting things is that when we look into it historically, Japanese citizens sending back information to home actually seems to be less a resource than some very strange and deluded individuals. And I do say strange and deluded individuals because if you consider the British example from the fall of Malaya and Singapore, he was a gentleman who had just about scraped into the British to become a British officer in India, thanks to various funding. Almost very nearly didn't get in it. Was considered a bit strange, but was okay. And he'd spent 6 months in Japan on basically leave. Found it a lovely, wonderful place. And is quite so clever that as the Japanese are attacking Singapore, when he's already been discovered as being held prisoner, he starts gloating about how he's going to get to see his wardens being killed, being other things, and that he's going to be living it up as a king for the rest of his life, thanks to Japan. And then there is a whole scenario of what happens to him, but all we do know is he doesn't survive the fall of Singapore. For certain, he doesn't survive. The accusation is that potentially the sergeant took him out and shot him into the harbour. There are other options which may have been carried out. Either way, it was not a successful policy for him. So, the thing is, the Japanese do have agents. How useful they are depends on your perspective. But they do have agents. He does sound like a traitor. He was one. But, you know, it takes all kinds. It takes all kinds. Now, the thing is, though, there is another option for how the Japanese learn that the fleet is at sea. Now, if the Americans are sensible, and they probably would be, if the Americans were sensible, they would probably let the fleet go to sea and then make a huge announcement that the US Navy is heading to the South China Sea. That's their option, which tells the Japanese they've left harbour. And then the rest of the world picks up and it flashes around the world. Their officers do a fleet exercise in the South China Sea would be the thing. And everyone know what they're really off to do, but, you know. Joint fleet exercise with the Royal Navy in the South China Sea. We're taking the entire Pacific Fleet. Oh, lovely. But they've got two other options in terms of that one. You might want to make that announcement that you're in the South China Sea when you're in the South China Sea. So they might embargo the news that the fleet is left until after the fleet gets to the South China Sea, and then announce the US Navy's in the Philippines. The full fleet has arrived. And have Kimmel try and work out whether or not MacArthur actually has something between his ears. He did have at one point. He occasionally has a good idea. We're not quite sure whether it's because the Magic 8 Ball works in there or whether there is actually brains. Magic 8 Balls have been known to be right occasionally. Randomness does help them. So the thing is, if they're going to find out that the fleet's left harbour, they are probably going to find out from the US government itself, not from a spy. And then they have to try and inform their fleet what they're doing. They have to inform the fleet what's going on. The Kido Batai, the Americans are not in harbour. The Americans are not in harbour. And that's gonna be an interesting one. Because the moment you start broadcasting that loudly, if they respond that they've acknowledged it as a response, they give away their position. But if they don't acknowledge it, you don't know they know. You're just hoping they know. Which means, do you keep transmitting? What do you do? How does the protocol work? How does the protocol work? Excuse me a second, I'm going to check on why this dog's sounding quite so distressed in the kitchen, I think. The corgi is currently complaining because the poodle, who is still high from drugs, is apparently trying to eat upside down. We'll leave that to one side. Okay, just leave it to one side and we'll deal with it later. The poodle had a surgery today. The poodle is fine. But let's then start going into these options. If they go for Pearl Harbour. Now this happens probably if they don't get the message. If they don't get the message about what's going on, they probably do go for Pearl Harbour. If they go for Pearl Harbour, what happens? Well, they probably hit Pearl Harbour with at least the first wave. But they're going to quickly notice there's no ships there. And the B5Ns loaded with torpedoes are probably going to have to go home because there's not much they can hit with their torpedoes. They can go for the pens. But honestly, the bombers and everything are going to be should focus in on the infrastructure. So that probably means that the fuel stores and everything are going to get hit. But saying that, the second wave, if that doesn't get called off, then it's silly. There is no point in sending the second wave hitting. And honestly, the Japanese are probably going to be loading up their fleet and never going to start loading up the third and fourth waves with bombs and things to attack land targets. They're going to concentrate completely on shipping because they're going to worry where the fleet is. They're going to start hunting the fleet. The thing is, though, the moment you attack Pearl Harbour, you're going to kind of reveal your position to the American fleet. You're going to kind of explain to them exactly where you are. And once you've done that, you're in trouble. You're in big trouble. Because that means the US Navy knows where to hunt. And they can get assistance in hunting you. And if the Pacific Fleet is to your west, they can try and ambush you. Their aircraft will try and do it first. Be sensible. Then I thought there was an IJN officer at the Hawaii Embassy. He was able to directly observe the harbour with no problem. Yes and no. You see, the problem is, yes, you do have him there, but you have to remember, they haven't informed them there's no carrier there. They haven't got that information, so that's not important enough for them to pass on. So what I was talking about was how do they inform them that the fleet isn't going? The big issue is, yes, there's an officer there, but how much information does he give out and get out from the embassy? And can he transmit it on secure lines, and issues with him getting his information out? And the thing is, doesn't matter how the information gets out. And I'm not sure about the Japanese IJN officer at the White. And yeah. You're talking about Takeo Yoshikawa, and yeah, he did what is his job. He provided information, but again, it's do they choose to do they choose to pass it on? They take the officer with them on the fleet and limit their comms. That is the advantage. You could always invite the people to go with you. You could always invite the people to go with you. But I doubt they would. The problem isn't so much having the information what the Americans are doing. Okay, I was trying to get to that point, and I talked about fifth columnists and those things. Forgotten to mention the spy. But the point is getting the information to the fleet so they can make the decision. And that's the thing. If you start broadcasting loudly, you don't know. Now, so as I said, if they go for Pearl Harbor, they reveal their position, and the odds are the Americans go hunting for them, and the Americans probably get the first hit in on the fleet in the fleet-on-fleet combat. And if Lexington and Enterprise do well, they might well take out two or three of the Japanese carriers in that strike. But then the Japanese will strike back. And that's the scenario. That is their problem. If, however, that works out into an interesting battle scenario, that really does. But to me, the other option is they don't respond, but they go for the Pacific Fleet. And here's the scenario for you. The Pacific Fleet is carrying on happily. No knowledge, nothing's attacked Pearl Harbor. The time taken for the Japanese to actually find the Pacific Fleet will mean that the time will have passed that war will be declared. If the time has passed that war's been declared, well then, they have an advantage, don't they? Because they're no longer doing anything underhand. But they will be stabbing them in the back, because you see, the US Navy's policy for moving forward means that you'll probably have a carrier group out port and starboard of the main advance, or rather north and south, with their task forces forward, and you'll probably have the battle squadrons coming up the rear. Now the thing is, if the Japanese locate them and attack them, they'll be attacking from behind, the position the US Navy is not expecting them to be in. Remember, the US thinks they're safe. They think the Japanese are in front of them, to the west of them. This means that the Japanese could quite quickly pile in, especially if we consider the strength of the first two strikes, onto the battleships. Onto the battleships. At sea losses could be terrible. 9681, you have very limited chance of that, because you have to remember the Japanese do visual search in daylight to find their enemy. So whereas when they launch the strike, it is the cusp of dawn, instead of launching the strike at that point, they'll be launching the searching aircraft. And if you consider the time that the letter is actually delivered, they will probably be finding the U.S. fleet after just about the same time the declaration of war is delivered. Nagumo doesn't have that much fuel to spend time searching, but also you have to remember any fuel spent heading back home is fuel he was going to be spending anyway. And if he gets a notification on the 6th that they've gone to sea, then he doesn't have to do the run towards Hawaii. He's starting early. If we go back to this position, to this route, if we think about where they are on the 6th, they are here. So they're heading there, you know, out to here. Well, the thing is, he'll be heading more southwest. He'd be skirting into the rear of the American search areas, but he could do it. And he could hit the US Navy from the rear. And hitting them from the rear is advantageous. Hitting them from the rear is very advantageous because he'll probably find very few fighters, and more importantly, he'll find the battleships. And that's going to be dangerous to those battleships. That's going to be sinking for those battleships. Now, the thing is, if the battleships get severely damaged, A, they can maneuver. So that gives them more of a chance. They can bring more of their firepower to bear because they have to less worry about buildings and things. They're going to have the task group around them in fighting formation, which gives them slightly more defensive. They can do all these things. That actually helps them. That helps them. But saying that, they're also now in deeper water, which means the Japanese torpedoes are going to be more effective. And less likely to hit the bottom, because, let's be honest, they have deeper water to go into and come up from. Rather than, you know, because their torpedoes don't belly flop, they nosedive. Because pretty much everyone but the British torpedoes don't. The British torpedoes nosedive because the British are obsessed with various things, whereas the Americans and the Japanese aren't, because they didn't have the frustration from World War I of the Kaiserlich Marines sitting in harbour. Every navy is exercising their trauma from World War I and World War II. It's just their traumas are different, and that's what affects some of their procurement decisions. The question is, does the fleet have Kimmel aboard it, or is the fleet under the command of wonderful, but slightly less, let's be honest, slightly less capable Vice Admiral Pye. I would say if you are taking the full fleet to sea, he's got to be out there with them. Now, whilst Michael Cooch, you are right, the IJN will probably find the fleet train as well. There is the very real possibility that IJN pilots, being IJN pilots, go, battleships! There is the possibility that they try, and they also do take out other ships, but and probably will go for other ships, but the thing is, there aren't enough cruisers around to really confuse them on the battleship front, in that there are actually going to be more battleships present than the cruisers in the battle force. Okay? There are many destroyers. There are 8, including the light cruisers with acting as flotilla leaders, the destroyers. There are 8 cruisers in the battle force. There are 9 battleships. Hitting the fleet train, if they do that as well, is going to cause a lot of disruption. But if they haven't hit Pearl Harbour at all, then that's going to be the same infrastructure hub it was for much of World War II. The thing is, it's going to depend how many battleships they actually sink. And it's also going to depend on how successful what happens next is going to be. Because my suspicion is, if they get attacked like that, the US naval aircraft carriers try and sneak their strike in following them home. Let's put it this way. The idea would be, okay, so we're using all our fighters to defend our fleet. Yes. How are we going to get a strike to the enemy? Well, we're going to load up our dive bombers, load up our torpedo bombers, and they're going to fly back behind the enemy formations, pretending to be enemy aircraft. That's literally their only option. And it's a good option for finding the Japanese. It's a very good option for finding the Japanese. And if you've already scouted, you've probably got some aircraft ready to go. The Americans will probably have them ready to go and quick. And if you remember, the carriers are forward, so the carriers are unlikely to be attacked in the first wave. They might get found in the second wave, but unlikely to be attacked in the first wave. Mark Harness, Colorado isn't there. Let's see. Oh yeah, Colorado isn't. Colorado wasn't there. I had Colorado there for this for a reason, though. I can't think why, but I did have a reason why I had Colorado there. I'm trying to remember why I put Colorado there. Oh yeah, because of the full force. I'll think about that. And maybe that hits their carriers, especially as the Japanese carriers, as they're preparing to launch. So it's the likely scenario, I would say, for the Americans to find. Do you think they'd use the smokescreen dive bombers that Halsey sent out on December 7th? Maybe as escort fighters after they deployed the smokescreens? Probably not, because if you've got you'd send that out potentially if you've got no other options. Potentially if you've got no other options. But the thing is, in this scenario, they'd probably be going for a strike. And therefore, smokescreen dive bombers, Ralph, as cool as they might be, you can also make smoke by setting your opponent on fire, which is more useful. Would Pennsylvania be there? In this scenario, she would be, because whilst I know where she was historically she's sitting in dry dock. In this scenario, she would be definitely brought out with a fleet, because you're not leaving her behind. And if you've had a couple of days warning, you're going to make sure she's out. Now, on the 7th of December, remember, she has 3 of her 4 screws removed and all sorts of things. She's undergoing a refit. That's traditionally what she's in December 7th. But again, you have to remember, this is a scenario whereby they have given a warning, and as part of that warning, they're going to have to given a heads up. A heads up to Kimmel. Which means he's probably going to have got his fleet ready to go. He's probably going to have got the fleet ready to go. And to me, that means things like Pennsylvania has to be able to be got out of dock. And if you've given me enough days from the 26th, I will hopefully have got her battle ready and out of her refit, because that's got to be my #1 priority. I've got to have every battleship I can. If I'm going to make a statement in the South China Sea, I can't afford to leave any battleship behind. I can't afford to leave Colorado behind, realistically. And I seem to remember from her, and this was why I've got I got her in the list, I think, but I didn't explain it at the beginning there. Sorry, I forgot that and to explain that. She's in Puget Sound Naval Yard undergoing an overhaul. Pennsylvania's in having her little refit in Pearl Harbour. And yeah. Colorado had left for Pearl Harbor on 25th of June, 1941. She is probably a little bit difficult to get back into service quickly, but again, if you're planning to use your fleet for this and for the scenario, you probably are going to try and get her out if you can. They turned Yorktown around pretty fast in 1 minute. Well, yeah. They have some capabilities at this, and they have some precedence of it. As of 1st of December? Well, basically, if you get the heads up on the 26th of November what you might be needing to do, you've got time to do it. You can probably get her back in the water and functioning. The IJN fleet sailed on the 26th of November. That's what we discussed at the beginning. Melanie. Yorktown pretty fast before Midway. Yes, they did. Would radar help mitigate attack from behind? I think California at least had more ships. Yes and no. Yes and no. It could do, but it's going to be... How do I put it? It's going to depend on how well it's being used, and it's not going to give them... the radar that California had at that time isn't, from memory, the greatest radar they've ever had, and they're certainly not as experienced in using it as they would be later on in the war. So, whilst it has an option of potentially mitigating attack, or an option of giving them an alert, I don't think it's going to mitigate the attack from behind, because I don't think it's going to give them enough warning. My gosh, does Pennsylvania have to be battle ready or look battle ready? Yeah, she has to look it, so she has to float and move. So it does lower the requirement of readiness a tad. You forgot West Virginia. It happens to us all. Saratoga available. Not really. At this point, USS Saratoga is doing some very interesting maneuvers. Saratoga has been basically US Navy's choice of fun for experimental carrier for the previous 20 years. She's done all sorts of interesting things in her service life. She has just had the CXAM-1 radar fitted. Her refit finishes at the end of November. And she is just embarking her air group in San Diego on the 7th of December. So basically, for her to be there, she would have had to embark her air group about a week and a half earlier and then to have rushed out. So again, it would have to be almost a concerted effort of, okay, we're going to be sending a warning. It's almost like 2 weeks before, a week before they're sending the final note, the Cordell Hull note. They'd have to be telling the Navy to prepare for this demonstration that's going to could happen in a couple of weeks' time and get every ship they could there. And then Colorado is an option. That was the longer term thing. That's why I was talking about Colorado earlier. Yes, I was supposed to talk about that, but I forgot to mention that one, didn't I? Yeah, I skipped 2, 3, 5, 6, 7 of my bullet points in the beginning. I do apologize. I managed to skip 7 of my bullet points. I almost literally skipped almost every other one. Oh well, I think I've done okay. I think I was still a bit distracted at the beginning from worrying about starting late. So yeah, Saratoga, she's there. California has a radar. Saratoga could be there, but I didn't think it really likely. I have to admit, that's why I didn't put her in. I put Colorado's more likely. Now, there's a reason for that. The reason is, whilst carriers with war experience become this thing they're focused on, pre-war and pre-war experience is going to be the battleships they're going to focus on getting, because the battleships are the statement. The battle line is what matters. New Mexico, Mississippi, and Idaho are in various other duties. New York, Texas, Arkansas, and the Atlantic. Yeah. They're doing various other things. And it is too short notice to get the North Carolinas there, from where they are. Anyway, I'm going to say question time for roughly half an hour, because as said, I've got to record the backup video tonight and then be ready for a 6 AM train. So I have to repack bags as well, because I just realised that I'm going for a day and a half. I'm going for 2 days longer than I thought I was when I packed my bags. Because I packed my bags. This sounds terrible. This is going to make me sound obsessive compulsive. Which there's nothing wrong with being, but I'm not. I'm just one of those people who packs my bags when I have a free time. If I know I've got a trip coming up, I will just get my bags. But if I have a free afternoon, I'll get my bags packed so I don't have to pack them before the night before the trip or anything like that. So I packed my bag 2 weeks ago. Just left them open so they wouldn't get damp or anything, but they're packed sitting upstairs with my clothing and everything worked out in them, so I'll be fine for when I go. Now I've got to add stuff into them, haven't I? So yeah, it'll be questions for about half an hour. Okay? Hi, John Shea. And no Discord tonight from me, probably. I might pack my bag, sort out the video, and then pop into Discord and go, hello everyone! But that'll be probably about midnight. Why 6 AM train? Because I have to get up to, because I'm going up to London, and I have to sort out various things once I'm up in London. Yeah, Ralph, less chance I'll forget things at the last minute. Yeah, but also it's also, I will admit that I'm not OCD, but there is one thing I am a bit focused on, and that is I don't like to stress myself out, and I don't like to play, how do I put this, I don't like to play chicken with my dyslexia. I know when I can forget silly things, and I don't want to turn up in place and not have a toothbrush, not have deodorant, not have enough socks, all those things. I don't have cats. I just have ambitious dogs. Yes. Well, there is a reason my bags were left open upstairs. There is a gate between them and the stairs, and many gates, and the corgi hasn't managed to make it through that gate yet. And I specifically got a gate that him making it through is going to make a big noise. You see, a metal gate he can slip through. But the gate I've got is a tension gate. And if he tries to get through it, it's going to make a big noise. And if he tries to gnaw his way through it, it's going to make a big noise. And so, no. How's Riley after the op? Does he have to wear something to prevent him scratching his ear while it heals? Nope. No, he's fine. He doesn't have to wear that. He did have a bandage on his paw. And he was fun because he was on a general anaesthetic. So the poodle on a general anaesthetic recovering. He was recovering in here this afternoon. He had fun with it. I wasn't quite so keen on it as an idea. Him recovering in here this afternoon was not fun to deal with. Thank you, Patron. Happy late channel anniversary. Thank you. Nothing like an escape artist pet. I have two. One can fly over things. The other one can, how do I put this politely, insert him into places, itself into places. I love you acknowledge they haven't made it through yet. Yes, I acknowledge they haven't made it through yet. I have plans to prevent them making it through. There is plans for another gate to be installed before they make it through the bottom gate. I'm planning to get another gate and install it on the upper gate, upstairs. So there will be literally gates at both the top and the bottom of my stairs. That is my plan. There will be gates in many places. Hopefully they will help. Hopefully they will help. My theory is if I have two gates which both make a noise, because I will give you a demonstration of noise. Yeah. So if the tension gate is released, I will hear that. Sima, how do you see priority building replacement vessels for the USN fleet? More battleships, carriers, light carriers, or cruisers? If it depends what happens in the battle. If the Americans lose battleships, but they fought hard, and the carriers manage to damage the Japanese carriers, then it could be seen as, well, okay, we underestimated the air threat. We hadn't completed the refit of these ships with the air defenses. We need to put in the battleships. It could be we need a lot of carriers. Considering what they've already got ordered, they're probably going to push everything at this point. What difficulties did you have with anesthesia recovery? From the poodle, basically crying occasionally. Basically crying occasionally. How do I... but yeah, the priority for the USN replacement fleet, I think, is probably going to be just build what they're already building as quickly as they can. I don't see that changing much than they did historically. But possibly more emphasis on getting the things like the... getting battleships out, especially if this ends up being a battleship fight somehow between Akita Batai and the Pacific Fleet. If there is somehow a battleship fight, that could be interesting. I realize a new invention, but have you ever considered a door? I do have doors as well, but they can open the doors. I would need to lock the doors. And I don't know about all of you here, but I don't like to have a lock on my bedroom door because that can seem strange, especially when it's inside a lockable section of the house. So, yeah, they can open the doors. They can open the handles. They can open circular handles, Roddy can open that, and lever handles. And Zebedee can't open them because he can't reach them, but that doesn't stop him trying. And I have found him dangling off handles. Literally going... It's quite funny to watch. Houdini hands. I sympathize. I used to have a bulldog who jumped through open windows to go say hello to neighbours rabbit. Yeah, bulldogs will do that. Wouldn't there be a bigger danger if they're engaged in deep water since there's no recovery from that? Yeah, it basically means anything lost is going to be lost. There is going to be a bigger danger in that scenario. There's nothing lost, but there's also the scenario that they're also, whilst they are, if they are lost in deep water. In deep water, they can maneuver more freely to avoid the attacks, and they can also, how to put this, they can orientate themselves. They're better defended at sea. It's one of the things, the fleet's usually better defended when they're at sea, when they can focus all their fire, when they can cooperate as a fleet. When in harbour, they're usually at a disadvantage because they are distributed as the harbour demands, not as the fleet demands. Dangling off the handle and doing the corky butt wiggle. Yep. We have 2 highly skilled canines. Highly skilled canines. Oh, someone's getting a tote bag this month from Patron. And someone's getting a mug. That's good. Yeah, big fat battle wagons and a landlocked dog pond. Yeah, that's pretty much the problem. The other point, the other thing would be to put it is that as much as these ships ships have firepower, have survivability, their survivability does depend on maneuver. A ship's survivability does depend on maneuver. Maneuver is an intrinsic part of a ship's survivability. The fact that it's maneuvering, it's moving. Would a video of Raleigh running around the garden work for an opener? It's tempting, but the trouble is Raleigh, how do I put this? When he does like to run, usually I am running after him because it's not in the garden. If he's running around the garden, it's he's having the zoomies and he looks insane. He loves it, but he does look insane. Yeah, sorry, Thomas. I'm not a dancer. That's the corgi and the poodle. They're the dancers, not the papa. Black Horse, if they were in deep water, would that affect the types of damage control used and the recovery of man overboard? Yeah, it would, but it would also mean that they have, as said, they would be in different positions because they wouldn't be in their Sunday in harbour routine. They would have far more things closed down. They would not be open for inspections. They'd not be prepping for that. They'd be at sea, and they'd be on sailing watches and sailing duties. Did I understand correctly that more that the carriers that are escorting the main battle fleet, rather than later in the war where the battleships would escort the carriers? Yeah, that was pretty much the American doctrine at the time. Cats are just as good at opening things when they want to as dogs. Dogs only have the advantage of size and leverage. Size and leverage. Okay, that's good. If they're at sea but at peace, would a cat be above the fleet? Yes, a cat would be flying. Standard practice, once you're in heightened tension scenarios, you're going to have your cap airborne. Water Brothers, I've already discussed they would be having air cover and their orders and what their orders are. That was earlier discussed in the video. So that's already been gone into quite detail and why they would have air cover. Depending on when they put out, they would meet up with. They would probably go out with Lexington with them, and Lexington probably they would be meeting up with Enterprise. Are you planning on getting this book done? Yes, I am planning on making sure the edits are all done. Making them have it. Okay, Walter, if you really want to distract us instead of going back, just watching early in the video, and I can understand it could mean important to you, but if I explain this one, right. So we've got the fleet going to sea on the 6th of December. On the 6th of December, if you look at where the fleet, the Lexington and Enterprise are historically, they're here. Now, the thing is, Lexington left on the 4th of December. So, if you are planning on the fleet going to sea on the 6th of December, it's holding. Lexington probably doesn't go to sea on the 4th, 5th of December. It probably waits till the fleet's going to sea and goes to sea with it. So that's held to the 6th. Enterprise is coming back on the 6th, and so we'll probably meet up with the fleet then. So, there you go. You've got your two carriers of your fleet. But, you know, that's the point of the scenario, and that's been talked through. I gotta go out to London for work. Pretty much, the reason why the carriers would be out ahead of the fleet is they are still doing the scouting formation and they're taking on the scouting role. Again, one of the problems for the US Navy and one of the advantages going with the carrier formation they've gone with is that the carriers have taken out on the scouting role. Them taking on the scouting role, they have to be at the front of the fleet. They have to be able to maneuver. Okay. Any more questions? Yeah, they have all the cruisers. Well, to be fair, they do have all the cruisers. That are between the two carriers, there's enough. There's as many cruisers that are with the battle fleet. Would Enterprise have enough supplies as they would have fleet? As they're planning to go for a demonstration, when they go out, she's probably okay, and they are. How do I put this? Probably able to supply her enough to keep her aircraft going for demonstration purposes. But honestly, it's not. It wouldn't really be pragmatic for a war plan. It's as said, they are planning to go to the South China Sea as a demonstration. And so, yeah, as long as they can fly on their cable, it's going now. Another reason for Kimmel to be at sea and not Pi is location demonstration in the area of the Asiatic fleet. Yes. So he's taking his fleet to go and see the Asiatic fleet. He's not losing his fleet to the Asiatic fleet. That's another reason for him to going. What would the US Army be doing in this scenario? Probably waving as they go away at this point. The US Army really is still trying to work itself up, like the US Navy is, and as such aren't really a mobile asset, so they're not going to be taking a few divisions with them at sea or something like that. They're heading to the Philippines, but they could be able to draw supplies from the British. They can resupply at sea, as Mark Harkness is talking about with Yorktown. So yeah, they should be okay. Vision. Army's job is to defend Hawaii and the fleet when in harbour. Life goes on as normal. Yeah, pretty much. They're going to be doing their duty. They're going to be doing what they need to do. You know, it's the life of the operations again. In this reason, no reason for General Short to get fired. Wonder what his wartime career would be like. That's an interesting possibility. There's also the scenario that if Pearl Harbor does get hit, he gets to blame for it or for anything that happens to Pearl Harbor, and Kimmel doesn't get the blame because Kimmel's not there to get the blame. Especially if Kimmel manages to attack the Japanese withdrawing as they've hit Pearl Harbor. But yeah, General Short's career, if his wartime career, if he doesn't get the blame for everything going wrong at Pearl Harbor, probably it's going to depend on which campaigns he gets given and what commands he gets and what happens. Does he get left? Does he get parked in Pearl Harbor and left there, or does he get given a more active command? Is he considered a replacement for other people? There are options. Sorry, I'm making notes as well at the same time. Nimitz in this scenario, well, that's the interesting thing. If he's not replacing Kimmel, especially if Kimmel's done a half-decent job and can't be replaced, then honestly, that's going to put Roosevelt at a disadvantage, because Roosevelt's always wanted Nimitz in charge of any war in the Pacific. So he probably ends up having to be pushed somewhere, or he's put out. He might end up a task force commander. That sounds strange, but it might end up being that, especially if you're increasing the size of the fleet, it might end up rather than Halsey and Spruance, it might be Halsey and Nimitz commanding the task forces. That's good. I think I've discussed that, and pretty much if they attack Pearl Harbor and they find no fleet there, they do one strike and they don't do it. They do one wave and that's it. They do one wave. They're already there. There's no point hiding it. They'll just do one wave. Would the American fleet be able to get between the Japanese fleet and their way home, or are the US battleships too slow for such a maneuver? They could conceivably get in the way. They could conceivably get in the way. Japanese don't have scouts out. They're relying on all sorts of information, but mainly once the fleet's gone, the fleet's gone. That's one of the reasons why the Japanese pilots spend so much time when they're over Pearl Harbor looking for the carriers, because the carriers aren't there. But their information, they weren't sure they didn't know where the carriers were. So this is the point again about Takeo Yoshikawa, the Japanese naval attaché / spy at the Hawaiian consulate. The information isn't getting through to the fleet, because if they broadcast it loud enough for the fleet to pick it up, then they could give away the fleet's position, or the fact that they're doing something. So they're not passing on information to the fleet. Thought they had some long-range seaplanes out scouting on before the 7th, December 7th. Not really. How do I put this politely? The Japanese are doing everything they can not to be detected, and that includes not doing too much scouting. They do have scout aircraft out, but they're not doing long-range scouting or flying over Pearl Harbor, or flying anywhere near Pearl Harbor. They don't want to give the game away, and they're not that long range. They are scouting the immediate vicinity so that the Akita Battalion can avoid running into things. They're not looking for their target. They're looking for things to avoid getting near. Yeah, any attack on American soil is going to cause the U.S. to declare war. So yes, if they do attack Pearl Harbor, they will cause a declaration of war. If this becomes a joint demonstration with Asiatic Fleet and full Z-plane, is Warspite hurried out of Puget Sound to join? There are going to be issues. The person who's probably going to be panicking the most in that scenario is probably going to be Churchill, if he's hearing that, because he's only got 2 capital ships out there, and it's going to make Britain look small. So he's going to be panicking. So who knows what he does? Possibly orders the Mediterranean fleet to quickly dispatch there. I don't know. The guy could both ignore it and could run away. Could charge into it. Could the information be passed on to the could the information be passed on to the Japanese fleet by having a relay of ships, subs, aircraft broadcasting on much weaker power? In theory, but arranging that is going to cause a whole lot of fuss, and that didn't exist. And that's going to change the plan dramatically. Plus, they have to have the resources in place to have those vessels in there. And any one of those things get found, it could cause trouble. It won't be a strong response from the American people, because honestly, just Hawaii getting attacked, if the fuel tanks get blown up, that's going to be annoying. But if you've not got the loss of people and the loss of the damage to the states of their names by damaging the battleships, then that's not going to have the same issue. Churchill could go their battleships. He could. I have no idea what's happened to the slideshow. Get back. And wouldn't the joint exercise of the Royal Navy violate neutrality? Not that that hasn't been totally breached by the Atlantic patrols. And warships being repaired in Puget Sound and all sorts of things. Yeah, in the nicest way, the neutrality was going a long way from where it is. Neutrality was a long way off at this point. I would say a joint exercise, especially in the South China Sea, to demonstrate about their commitment to French Indochina remaining French, would probably be seen as viable to get past it. That's good. No, this is a response to the ICAP before 7 question. Yes, but that also means a lot more possible points for the USN to come across them and go, wonder why all these Japanese ships are here in a line to Pearl Harbour. Yeah, there are so many issues with that one. It's a nice idea in theory, but in practice it's not something you should do. During exercise, the British vessels were just on their way to Singapore, and the US just wanted to make sure they got there safely. It's a fraternal international exercise. The British and the Americans do passing exercises regularly. The British often come and see American exercises. At this point, we're inviting them to take part so we can understand their war experience. So more of a possibility of peaceful resolution instead of a full-on war with no surrender. I think more of a possibility of a negotiated solution, yes, without loss of life at Pearl Harbour. But I think you have to still think that the Americans are going to push hard. No, Walter Boris, because it's not a preemptive war without congressional say, because the Japanese are still attacking. The Japanese are still doing their declaration of war, and they're still attacking the American fleet. So there's still the Japanese declaring war. It's not a scenario where Congress is going to go, well, we don't want to declare war. Well, we're under attack. The Japanese are at war and declare war on us. They're attacking. That's still part of this. It's just when they go, the Pearl Harbor is empty when they attack. That's the problem. Pearl Harbor being empty does, as I said, create some problems from the propaganda perspective and the war motivation perspective. It doesn't cause too many issues, though. And sending the fleet to demonstrate in the South China Sea your commitment to the French Indochina, remaining Japanese free in protest against Japanese occupation of French Indochina, is, you know, that's not declaration of war. That's just very affirmative diplomacy. Very affirmative diplomacy. That's good. I think if only Pearl Harbour, the chance of negotiating solutions there is possible. Adding Philippines and Malaya to the list, I think that demand for surrender will still be there. I think also if the fleet survives and there is a fleet action, that's going to affect the attack on the Philippines. It might even affect the attack on Malaya. You are clutching at straws, New IKB 4472. You're envisioning the use of civilian fishing vessels. The thing is, if we consider that by 1982, not even all large merchant vessels had radios on them of sufficient kind to be useful for two-way communication and operations, how unusual do you think it is to find large fishing vessels in the middle of the ocean with working radio systems in 1941? How unusual. If you come across one, oh, that must be rich. Ah, there's a second one. And there's a third one. And there's a fourth one. And there's a fifth one. Okay, what the frigate's going on here? Logistics are moving a fleet that far from... No, there is actually the possibility. There is, as... To quote my good friend Sal, who was here not too long ago, Mercalagos, from what are going in shipping, they have 11 fleet oilers and they can carry 750,000 barrels of fuel. The fleet, the pre-war monthly consumption is 400,000 barrels of fuel. The first 9 days of war steaming, they used 750,000 barrels of oil. Honestly, considering if they leave, they're going to be fully topped up with fuel from the 4.5 million 4.5 million 4.5 million barrels of oil that is stored in Pearl Harbour at this point. They can make it across, and then if you've got fuel sitting in Singapore and the Philippines, they can be resupplied once they're there. So it's not going to be easy. It wouldn't be easy, but it would be perfectly possible. And considering what the politicians have already asked the fleet to do at various points, it's not unusual for them. So Doolittle Raid sinking those trawlers was an exercise in extreme caution. Yep. But the thing was, there were some trawlers that have radios, and some were out there as part of a bit of an oceanic picket line with flares and things. So, yeah, it's extreme caution, but it's justifiable extreme caution. That's what the vast majority of fishing is over the continental shelf. The deep ocean is more like a desert until you get really deep. Yeah. Bishop, they were picket ships. Armed trawlers a thing, but if they're off a potential enemy harbour, very suspicious. Or if they're in a line across through the ocean. And some of the picket ships were picket ships and some weren't. Don't go home. Life is in sunlight, top 30 feet. Depends what you're hunting. Depends what you're fishing for. Depends what you're fishing for. For example, if you're hunting tuna, they tend to be 100 to 400 meters deep. So that's 300 to 1,300 feet below the surface. So deep sea tuna, they're some things. So it depends what you're looking for, what kind of depth, and the fact that I did remember that they were much deeper off the top of my head worries me. But we'll leave that to one side. I looked up the exact depth, but I remember they were a lot deeper than 30 feet. Did the Doolittle fleet detect radio transmissions from the trawlers encountered? That's something which has been discussed. But, yeah, there's differing accounts on that front. Honestly, probably it's a bit of both. That was an extension of my fishing boats and the sea ocean itself. Add radios and it gets very suspicious. Yeah. A Japanese fishing boat was in the Caribbean on December 7th. They found out about the war when they got arrested. Yeah, that explains it. Does Philip Sortie set a Force Z to try to link up with the survivors? Potentially. It depends on what's happened. As I said, if the fleet is underway at sea, there is a very real option that they survive in better form than they did historically. This is going to sound strange. The ships which are sunk are going to be completely lost. But the ships also have more chance of avoiding being hit. So it's going to be rather strange. The ships which are sunk, there's going to be no chance of recovery any ship which is sunk. Okay, in this scenario. But there's more chance of the ships avoiding being hit in the first place because they can maneuver. And because they can present their fire, and because they can coordinate with the wider fleet in our information. So yeah, that's their scenario. Well, there are multiple trawlers sunk, Melanie 1640. So there, if you detect transmissions and you go right, then I think it's this area, so I'm going to deal with all the trawlers here. Yet it was one trawler which transmitted. As said, there are, and then there's the scenario of the fact that some sources claim they weren't out there as pickets; they were just out there fishing, and other sources, yeah. So it's, yeah, it's a, they were probably justified. They were probably justified. It was I think it was a legitimate target, but the thing is, not all of them were possibly out there actually actively transmitting their things. And it was the transmissions and the fear of being spotted that leads them launching early. Yes. Anyway. Right then, it is now 10 past 10. Thank you very much, everyone, for listening. I have to be on a train in a little under 8 hours' time, so I will say thank you to you all. Take care, and I'm going to record now the video that's the backup video for Sunday. And I hope you all enjoy. If I have to run it because Brew Ships isn't available, then I hope you all enjoy it. I'm not going to tell you what it is, but it should be a fun one. And if after I recorded that and check my bags are packed up, if people are still on Discord, I'll pop into Discord and say hi. Anyway, thank you very much everyone for watching. Hope you enjoyed and take care. Thank you, DG40, Ralph, Michael Cooch, Team Locker, all the people on Twitch, Jonathan Moon, and everyone else who's chatting away on Twitch. It's really fun having you here. And thank you, everyone. Hope you all enjoyed and hope you found it useful. Hope you found it interesting. Take care, and Good night. What coming up? We have the 5th. We have next week the Battle of Zonshio, which is recorded, and you should already see it advertised. And the 15th, I'm not announcing yet. It's going to be a special day. Take care, everyone. Thank you for watching. Oh, the train won't be too bad. I'm going up standard class. It should be okay. It's always fun. It's always fun. Not really, Walter Brothers. One of the things about alternate history, and this is why I do the scenario of I talk you through the history, and then I talk you through the alternate, and I make sure I explain where we're diverting and what the impacts are. It's nothing unusual for fleets to be sent to demonstrate. And in this scenario, it makes sense for them to do it. And yes, it's the Buffalo on Friday. So, take care, everyone. Have fun, and enjoy.